The morning began with a cold that seeped right into your bones, and she, Clara, walked down those hallways that had become a sort of minefield. She was 60 years old, had an impeccable career spanning more than 3 decades, and a fondness for that company which, until recently, had been like her second home. But today, the same place that had watched her grow now looked at her with different eyes, eyes that judged her age, her experience, as if it were a burden. Too old, they'd say with a smile that never reached their eyes. How had it come to this? How had a place made for growth and innovation become a stage for humiliation? Clara entered her boss's office, the man who, until recently, had considered her one of his pillars. The goodbye was curt without preamble. "It's nothing personal, it's just we need new blood, younger, more dynamic," he said in a tone that tried to be professional but couldn't hide the contempt. He said it as if handing over an old office, a useless piece of junk. And at that instant something in her broke, but not to stay down. No, that very break was the trigger for a strength she had kept locked away for years. Who was Clara, really? What secret did that silence hold, which now exploded in her mind with the power of a volcano? While she packed her things in boxes, she watched her co-workers walk by, some with looks of pity, others with indifference, and still others clearly celebrating the fall of the old woman. She had been more than an employee. She was a key player in a top-secret project that the company had decided to keep hidden even from top management. A project that, if exposed, would not just change the company but the whole market. But nobody knew that. Nobody but herself and a small group she had worked with years before. A group that now had left no trace. Now she was outside, but the power of that knowledge kept her tethered to an invisible edge that could cut everything, or completely turn her story around. The day dragged on slowly, as if time wanted to prolong her humiliation. But Clara was not willing to let this be her final chapter. That same afternoon, just as the building was emptying out, she sent out an invitation for an urgent meeting without specifying the reason, not even to her boss. Knowing that curiosity would triumph over routine, the invitation spread by word of mouth and soon became the talk of the day. No one knew what to expect, but everyone needed to know. When the time came, the meeting room was full. Executives, mid-level managers, even some employees who were usually too busy to pay attention to such things. Clara appeared in the doorway, not as the defeated woman they had fired, but with a gaze that seemed to burn the air. She walked straight to the center with a firm step and the confidence of someone who holds something that could topple empires or save careers. Her words were measured, laden with a disquieting calm. She began to unveil data, documents, and even recordings that no one had dared review. Everything was there, on her laptop, and her voice shattered the silence like a hammer breaking glass. The revelation was clear. The company, trying to cut costs, had ignored a crucial problem. A severe technical fault in one of its flagship products, discovered by Clara years ago and reported internally, but covered up so the numbers would keep rising and investments wouldn't stop. She had safeguarded all the material because she knew that one day this would come to light and the company would have to face the truth. Faces started to change. From disbelief they turned to concern, from concern to urgency. Why hadn't action been taken sooner? How had so much silence been possible? And who had been afraid or too invested to keep it all quiet? As the murmurs grew, Clara didn't let the meeting spiral into chaos. She demanded answers, reminding them that careers are built on transparency and honesty, not betrayal and cover-ups. But the hardest blow was not the evidence she presented, but the quiet, steady way she proved she hadn't just been another employee, but the guardian of the project's integrity, the key that could either save or doom the company if they chose to ignore her. It wasn't a matter of age, but of courage. And courage isn't measured in years, but in decisions, seconds stretched into hours. There were more questions than answers. Nobody wanted to look Clara in the eye, yet everyone knew she was right. It was in that moment of tense, loaded silence, impossible to define, when the CEO appeared at the door. Her face showed surprise, but also a calm no one expected. She came forward, looked at the documents, and spoke up. She said that no one deserved to be humiliated because of age, nor discarded for no reason, and that the truth Clara revealed was an urgent call to set things right. But there was more. The CEO hinted that Clara's story wasn't just a closed chapter, that perhaps this was just the beginning of an internal struggle, that Clara had a vital role in the future, beyond whatever prejudices tried to dictate. When Clara left the room, she was no longer the same woman who had arrived that morning. The humiliation had given way to an unstoppable force, and in her hands she carried not just the truth, but the key to change everything. The fear, the disconnection, the labels, all of that was left behind. Now she had the power to prove that age was just a number, and that real experience is a weapon no one could take from her. As details of that meeting began to leak out, the looks she received changed. There was something in the way Clara stood her ground that broke down arguments and commanded respect. And though the road ahead would be hard, one thing was clear: nobody would ever underestimate her presence again. Because she knew better than anyone that a story doesn't end with a closed door, but in the way you decide to open it once more. And so, with that echo ringing through the walls of the company that had once rejected her, Clara prepared herself for what she knew would be just the first chapter of a battle for dignity, justice, and above all, recognition. A battle in which age would not be an obstacle, but her greatest ally. They say that no one is indispensable, but for Clara, those words were not only unfair, but deeply hurtful. At 60 years old, she had dedicated more than 35 years to that same company, watching it evolve, survive crises, and becoming the key piece in a mechanism that no one seemed to notice until today. The meeting where her world fell apart began as a routine procedure, but ended up being a desert of empty words, filled with humiliation and a silence that echoed with every, "Because of your age, you don't fit in this new stage." She, a strong woman whose gaze had once weathered every storm, felt that inner fire fade away little by little. But what her boss didn't know was that Clara kept a secret that could change not only her fate, but that of the entire company. And that secret, kept in silence for years, was about to come to light at the most unexpected moment. When they let her go without warning, they tried to make her believe that everything was over, that the place where she had built her career no longer had space for an older woman. But Clara, far from sinking, decided that this injustice would be the fuel she needed. Because behind that corporate facade and those hurtful words, she knew things no one else knew. Information that could turn the company's course around, that if revealed, would put everyone on the ropes, starting with those who had humiliated her. She had never been just another worker. She had always been the secret guardian of something valuable, a piece of data, a formula, a hidden project she had developed in silence, whose fruits were about to bear out. And that knowledge, trapped in the shadows, was her strongest card. But it wasn't just about technical information, but something much more human, an authentic connection to the company's story and its values. Clara had seen how, in their rush for change and their disregard of those who had been pillars, they were turning the company into something even she didn't recognize. Colder, more calculating, less genuine. And in an impromptu meeting called by her ex-boss to close chapters, he didn't realize Clara was prepared to reveal something that would disrupt all their plans. The boardroom, which had witnessed her dismissal, would become the stage where her truth would break the silence, leaving everyone wondering who was truly indispensable in that room. As her former colleagues looked on, with a mixture of surprise and confusion, Clara began to speak, not with bitterness, but with a strength born of years of knowing, observing, and keeping silent. She shared what no official report ever recorded: how she had secretly created an analytical system that could prevent an imminent crisis that the new policies ignored. How she was aware of the risks they were taking and the potentially devastating consequences, but no one wanted to listen because, to them, her voice no longer mattered. In that instant, the atmosphere changed. She was no longer the old woman who didn't fit, but the only voice with the experience and information necessary to save them. Why wait until now? Because Clara needed the perfect moment, and this meeting was her chance. Clara's words served to open doors that had been closed for years. But they also awakened difficult questions. Why had she kept it all to herself for so long? What had stopped her? And what would change now? Tension grew as the executives exchanged nervous glances. And amid that confusion, Clara made it clear she deserved her place, but also pointed to an invisible road toward the true survival of the company. Perhaps age was just a number, but wisdom, that was truly priceless and present in every word she spoke. It wasn't just a moment of vindication, but a turning point for everyone, because that meeting didn't just change the perception of Clara, but also what real value means within a team. And although not everyone would admit it out loud, that revelation left an indelible mark. Clara not only regained the respect she had lost, but left a warning to those who thought they could just discard talent because of a date on an ID card. The story was far from over, and everyone in that room knew that a secret, when protected for too long, can be the most powerful weapon in the world. And so, with a mix of astonishment and nerves, the eyes of everyone remained fixed on Clara as she finished her story. But she was looking beyond, seeing a possible future marked not just by fear of change, but by hope for a new beginning. What decisions would they make now? Would they truly be able to listen? Or, like so many before, would they try to silence her voice again? What happened next would define not only her fate, but the course of the entire company. And even if the present seemed uncertain, the truth that came from her lips became a flame no one could extinguish. Clara was no longer just the unfairly dismissed or the older worker singled out. She was the living symbol that value goes far beyond age, and that sometimes silence holds the most powerful truths. Can you imagine being fired not for what you do, but simply because of your age? That's what happened to Marta, a 60-year-old woman with more than 3 decades of history at the company. Without warning, her boss humiliated her in front of everyone, told her she no longer fit the modern vision, and left her out with no chance to defend herself. But what nobody knew, not even her arrogant boss, was that Marta held a secret that could change everything in a single meeting. How could someone who seems defeated become the key piece that will shake the foundations of an empire? Marta had always been a solid figure, discreet but indispensable. The person who, away from the limelight, had kept the company's internal machinery running from her remote office. But with the arrival of a new director, the dynamic changed. Youth and speed now seemed the only qualities that mattered. One day, with a coldness that hurt more than any physical blow, they told her her age was a problem. She didn't protest. She just endured that awful humiliation. However, her mind didn't stop working. That firing was not the end. It was the spark for something much bigger. The day after being fired, Marta returned to the office just to collect her things. Walking through those hallways where she had spent her life for 30 years, she felt invisible, as if she had meant nothing to the company. But while she was doing so, she remembered a crucial detail, a small change no one had noticed, a programming error in a new software that upper management was about to implement. For anyone else, maybe just a minor technical issue. But for her, who knew every gear of that machinery, it was a catastrophic flaw that could threaten the very survival of the company. What if no one noticed in time? What if the storm was about to break? Marta was not willing to be forgotten or to stay silent. When an urgent email arrived just hours later, convening an emergency meeting of the entire board, she knew this was her moment. No one would imagine that the ex-employee fired for age reasons would be the one holding the keys to save them all. She showed up uninvited, walking in with firm steps and a steady gaze, while people in the room wondered who this woman was coming in without permission. At that instant, no one knew what to expect. Was she the crazy woman who had been unfairly sidelined, or someone much more powerful than she appeared? In front of an auditorium full of bewildered faces and reproachful gazes, disguised as surprise, Marta spoke. She started softly, like someone whispering uncomfortable truths, but soon her voice grew strong, each word sharp as a scalpel. She explained the error, detailed how that small problem could become a financial disaster, a loss of clients, and ultimately the downfall of everything they had built. Each fact, each thought, each piece of proof she presented raised the tension in the room. The very same executives who had fired her now looked at her with increasing disbelief. How could someone considered obsolete know something they didn't? But the story doesn't end here. Marta's admission opened up a whole range of questions. Why had they fired her precisely when she held the solution? What dark interests were behind all of this? The tension became unbearable. The new director, the man who had so coldly excluded her, tried to discredit her. He threw out doubts, insinuations, even a veiled threat. But Marta didn't flinch, because she had saved something for that moment, an ace up her sleeve that no one expected. She pulled from her bag a file with internal records, conversations, and evidence that some decisions had not been made out of incompetence, but for hidden interests, putting the entire company at risk for personal gain. The room turned into a verbal battlefield, where Marta went from victim to protagonist, and from unknown to possible savior of the company's future. People began to look differently at the woman they once called old. Some started to wonder how much talent they had let slip away, how many opportunities were lost just because of absurd and cruel prejudices linked to age. Her revelation didn't just impact the meeting, it began a wave of internal reflection for everyone present. What else had they made invisible? How many times had they needlessly punished those who brought more than just youth? The tension reached unimaginable heights when Marta finished her speech. No one spoke at first. Then the silence was broken by confused murmurs and nervous glances. But deep down, something had changed. She was not just a woman who had been unfairly dismissed. She was someone who had reminded everyone that true value is not found in age or appearances, but in what you know, how you use that knowledge, and the courage to confront the system when it's wrong. That unexpected meeting didn't just change Marta's fate. It opened the door to a silent revolution that few could see coming. Marta left with dignity, certain that her story was just beginning, because in a world that seemed to be racing forward without looking back, she had demonstrated that the power of experience can be the most lethal weapon of change. And while the boss, who humiliated her, tried to rebuild his image, in a corner of the company, hundreds of employees who had ignored her began to wonder, what secrets did each of them hold that deserved to be heard? With a simple gesture, Marta had opened a Pandora's box that no one knew whether they could close. And you? What would you be willing to reveal if given the chance? Marta's story doesn't end here. It's just beginning. The door slammed shut behind her with a sharp bang that seemed to echo throughout the hallway. Clara felt the stares of all her co-workers piercing her back, but there wasn't a single gesture of support, no greeting, not even a look of surprise. Just silence. The word older echoed in her head over and over, like an unbearable refrain that humiliated her more than the news itself. Let's be realistic, Clara. Your time has passed, her boss had told her, making no effort to hide the condescension in his voice. She was 60 years old, but she had years of experience that no young person in the office could match. She could feel it. The injustice gnawed at her soul. She had never expected such treatment. She had given more than 3 decades to the company, had seen projects, people, and clients grow, and yet to them, she was just a hindrance. The phrase, "it's better to make way for the young," felt like both a farewell and a sentence. But Clara was not leaving without making something clear, because she knew something they never imagined. A secret she'd kept with the same discretion with which she'd worked days and nights in the company, never once receiving a thank you. A secret that would not only put the boss who had humiliated her in check, but also the entire board. Days passed and life went on. Although for Clara, nothing was the same again. In the shadows of her departure, she wove a bold plan in her mind. She knew she couldn't face them head-on, according to their logic and their rules. But she also knew they had made a fatal mistake, underestimating her, thinking age was a sign of decline, and forgetting that wisdom is not lost with the passage of time. It is honed. Her decision was clear. She would attend the weekly executive meeting, to which, in principle, she was not invited. And there she would make her unexpected appearance. The meeting was going to be her stage, the place where Clara would finally reveal her truth. The moment when she would prove that, however much they wanted to erase her, she remained a key part of the company. But not only that, she had something that would change everyone's perception. A twist no one saw coming. She was no longer the victim. She was about to become the protagonist who would leave everyone speechless, making them forget forever the cruel words and her last day at the office. The day of the meeting arrived, bringing a strange tension to the atmosphere. Clara walked to the conference room with a steady step, without raising her voice or asking for permission. The surprise on the faces was immediate. The woman they had ignored and dismissed was there, requesting to speak. Her boss frowned, puzzled, as he tried to understand how she'd gained entry. Calmly, Clara opened her folder, took out some papers, and began to speak. Her voice was steady, strong, full of the authority she had accumulated over decades. She laid out for them a document detailing a secret project, a proposal she had been quietly working on for months, and which, through her internal knowledge and strategic vision, only she could have conceived. The information she revealed was crucial, evidence of financial irregularities, reckless decisions, and failed strategies that endangered the whole company. With every word, the tension in the room grew. There was no escape, no justification for ignoring what she was saying. Then something unexpected happened. The gaze of the same boss who had fired her began to falter, not from fear, but from the realization that he had lost the battle before the story had even begun. Clara had not only proven that her age was not an issue, she now held the key to saving the company she loved so much, the company they were driving straight to disaster. No one could break the silence that followed her revelation. It was Clara who spoke again, this time to demand not only that they reconsider her dismissal, but that they open their eyes to the invaluable resource they had in people like her, people who for years had invested and believed in long-term growth, in experience as a value that goes beyond what's printed on a business card. By the end of that meeting, Clara had not only regained her place, she had forever changed the way that team viewed time, maturity, and the power of knowledge. But Clara's story doesn't end there. In fact, it's only just beginning, because in life, sometimes the hardest blows only pave the way for the most unexpected victories. And in that moment, her gaze revealed that she still had much more to share, that the true secret was only just coming to light, and that this time, no one would be able to ignore her again. The news hit like a bucket of cold water in the oppressive silence of the office. "You can't stay here," her boss told her with a coldness that chilled the air. "Your age no longer matches the energy or vision we need." 60 years, she thought, 60. And they were accusing her of something absurd, being too much for a world that moves forward without looking back. The humiliation was public, a sentence without defense, pronounced in front of colleagues who barely concealed their discomfort. The farewell was a display of poorly hidden arrogance, an act that would weaken anyone except her. But something in her gaze did not break. There was something more. There always had been. She was not just another employee. She was the silent guardian of a secret that could upend everything. And she knew it. The door closed behind her with a sharp slam, but in her mind a new chapter was beginning, one nobody anticipated. As the days passed, she immersed herself in that enigma the company had been hiding for years, a code buried in forgotten documents, an anomaly in the balance sheets, a pattern only someone with her experience could detect. It was no coincidence that now, when the wind was blowing against them, the only solution was in her hands. But who would listen to her? Who would believe that a 60-year-old woman still had cards up her sleeve? Just then, the unexpected email arrived. There was an urgent meeting to discuss an anomaly found in the financial system. And she was there, in the room reserved for the heavyweights, invisible to many, but paying attention to every word. With just minutes to spare, and the pressure squeezing her chest like an invisible hand, her mind worked quickly. She had prepared something, a revelation that would not only clear her name, but shake the very foundation of that company. When the boss began to speak, with that air of superiority she now knew all too well, the room crackled with fear and anticipation. No one expected that the key piece to solving the problem would be her, the very one they had discarded without a second thought. And when she spoke, everyone sensed a change in the room. An electric current spreading with her short phrases, her concrete data, and the confidence of someone who knows her worth. It was a silent bomb, a clear signal. They had not measured how much they underestimated someone who lived and breathed the history and secrets of that company. The data began to fall into place. The errors to clear, and a devastating truth came to light. It was not just a financial issue. It was an internal conspiracy, a dirty game meant to protect a few at the expense of many. And there she was, the piece no one expected. Instead of an aging woman with no future, she revealed herself as the strategist who had anticipated what everyone else had ignored. The tension in the room grew with each word, each discovery she laid out, like cards being turned over in an unexpected game. There was no room for doubt or ignorance, and when the meeting ended, with stares that could no longer deny her their respect, she returned to her place. This time not as a farewell but as a warning. There was still much to see, much to change, and above all, much to fight for. Her age was not a burden, but an armor forged in years of experience, determination, and the certainty that no one can silence the voice of someone who knows her worth. The company wouldn't see it coming, but she was ready, determined, unstoppable. And this story was just beginning. She never imagined that one day her boss would look at her with those cold, contempt-filled eyes and utter words that would hurt more than any criticism. "You're too old to stay here." Claudia, 60 years old, had dedicated over 30 years to the growth of that company. She was more than an employee. She was a pillar, a living memory, a walking courier of the past and the present. But in an unexpected twist, she received a call to go to the CEO's office, where the coldness of a dismissal, disguised as concern for the company's future, awaited her. At that moment, Claudia's world was shaken. Not because she hadn't seen the shadow of contempt coming, but because of the humiliating way she was cast aside. "Your age doesn't fit with the new projects. We need young people with energy, new approaches," they told her while she listened, incredulous, as each word unearthed years of dedication and effort. But what they didn't know, what Claudia guarded closely, was a secret, a piece of knowledge within the company that, if revealed, would turn everything upside down. Resistance was pointless. Her dismissal letter arrived quickly, along with a severance package that hardly covered her anger. Out in the hallway, lit only by fluorescent lights, Claudia felt shame burning her skin. It wasn't just a lost job. It was as if someone had broken an invisible contract, respect for her experience, recognition of her value. But that very afternoon, as she collected her belongings, something inside her began to boil. She wasn't going to stay silent. The revelation she held was hidden behind years of observation, patience, and discreet gathering of information. Claudia knew something that neither the CEO, nor his middle managers, nor the newcomers from the innovation area were aware of. She knew that the next quarterly presentation was not only vital for the company, but also depended on a system she had helped design at its beginnings, a system that was now about to fail catastrophically. A vulnerability that could become public, destroying the company's reputation and putting million-dollar contracts at risk. That's why, when an urgent meeting was called for the next day by the director himself, Claudia sensed something big was happening. not by direct invitation, but because she heard rumors, and with her contacts inside, discovered that almost the entire key team would be there. It was no coincidence. This was her chance. And although she wasn't on the official list of attendees, she decided to show up. The right to defend what she had built weighed more than any protocol. Upon entering the meeting room, a heavy silence greeted her. Eyes fixed on her, some confused, others cold, many uncomfortable. The director looked up, visibly annoyed to see her there. "Claudia, this meeting is for the executive team only. I don't understand what you're doing here." Without hesitation, she replied calmly, but with a strength no one expected. "I'm here because you're about to make an irreparable mistake, and you know it. That's why you need me." Even if you don't want to admit it, the air grew tense. The tension rose like a wave on the verge of breaking. The director tried to cut off the conversation, but there was something in Claudia's serenity, in that distant and confident gaze, that paralyzed any attempt to dismiss her. "What are you talking about?" he asked, trying to stay calm, but with a thread of anxiety betraying his voice. Claudia then pulled a flash drive from her purse, a small object loaded with symbolism and power. "This is everything you need to avoid disaster. It concerns the core system that controls much of your operations. Many believe it to be up to date, but only a few know its weaknesses. And that's us, those of us who have been here for years, those who have seen what others didn't care to see." She began laying out a truth no one expected. She pointed out dates, versions, technical errors that had been half-fixed, decisions ignored by a generation eager for new technologies without understanding the legacy keeping everything running. The screen showed documents, forgotten emails, internal reports that she had kept as a secret memory of the company. Each revelation breaking through faces of disbelief, sadness, and even fear. But then came the crucial moment. The director looked at the flash drive, then at the room full of executives, their faces tense, aware their plans could collapse that very night. "Why are you telling us this now, Claudia? Why did you hide this information until you lost your job?" She took a deep breath and confessed, with a tone that seemed to blend pride and disappointment. "Because no project, no matter how brilliant, can stand without knowing the ground you walk on. Because many times, new energy means trampling on those of us who built the road. And because you were so focused on what's new that you forgot what should never change." The questions began multiplying. What can we do to fix this? Is it possible to correct before the launch? How much time do we need? Claudia answered, with the certainty that experience had given her. With my help, there's still time. But the clock doesn't forgive. The meeting video later circulated throughout the company, showing not a dismissed older woman, but the voice that had saved their future. The next day, her dismissal was reconsidered. But not only that, she was invited to lead a team to review and update all the old systems, combining the wisdom of experience with the drive of youth. The change wasn't just about a recovered position, but a vital lesson for everyone. Claudia's story became a reminder that age is not a defect, but a strength. That respect is the basis of all progress, and that appearances can be deceiving. And as she walked into this new stage, she knew that the most important thing was not proving she was right, but that she never lost her own voice. In the end, the company had not only saved its reputation, but also gained something even more valuable: the humility to learn to value all the ages and experiences that form the backbone of any enduring project. Because sometimes, what seems like an unjust ending is only the beginning of a revelation no one saw coming. And in that revelation, Claudia rewrote her own destiny. She never imagined that the day which started like any other would end up changing her life forever. Clara was 60 years old, an amount of experience that seemed more like a burden to the company than an invaluable treasure. And that day, in front of her boss and co-workers, she was humiliated with no regard for her years of dedication. She was fired for being older, for not fitting into a mold no one questioned anymore. But she wasn't going to stay quiet. Because beneath that smile they thought fragile, Clara kept a secret none of them could have imagined. A secret she was about to reveal at the most unexpected meeting, one that would change the game forever. It all began in the office, a grey and cold place where laughter had faded and tension was palpable. Clara came in that morning with her usual routine, but with a strange lightness, as if she could sense what was coming. Her boss, Rodrigo, wasted no time getting her out of her comfort zone. "Clara, I need to talk to you in my office," he said, without even meeting her eyes. That voice, once an ally, now sounded like a verdict. She knew what was coming. Everyone said she was outdated, that the numbers just didn't add up anymore, that the company needed new blood to keep up the pace. But Clara knew it wasn't just that. There was something they ignored, something that went beyond years and figures. In the meeting, Rodrigo's words struck like a bucket of cold water. "Your performance has declined," he began, with a tone meant to be firm, but which sounded like a cheap excuse. "The company needs people who understand new technologies, people who are dynamic. Your age doesn't help in such a competitive environment. That hurt more than any number or report." Her colleagues' gazes pierced her, a mix of pity and bewilderment, and she, in silence, felt the burn of injustice in her chest. But she wouldn't let this scene be the final word. When she was handed the termination letter, everyone thought everything was over for Clara. She left with few words, leaving behind an echo of resentment and unanswered questions. But in her mind, a plan was taking shape. For years, she had worked at that company not just as an employee, but as a guardian of secrets no one else saw. She had discovered a small anomaly in the financial system that anyone else would have missed. An irregularity that, if left unchecked, could cost the company millions. But not only that, Clara had recorded every detail with the patience of someone who knows exactly when to act. Days went by, and the company continued on its path, oblivious to what was coming. Rodrigo, confident he'd closed an uncomfortable chapter, carried on with his talk of renewal and modernization. However, an unexpected meeting was called for all employees in a large room, promising to address an urgent matter. No one knew that this meeting would forever change their perception of Clara and her true value. At that moment she appeared, calm, resolute, putting the hypocrisy of those who'd eliminated her so coldly on hold. Without a word, Clara took control of the meeting. She pulled a folder from her papers and placed it on the table like a bomb about to explode. "Before we keep talking about people and ages, I need to show you something," she said in a clear, steady voice. One by one, she unraveled the web of hidden numbers, irregular transactions, and shady decisions that had gone unnoticed under the watch of those who thought they had absolute control. Rodrigo couldn't hide his surprise. His eyes went wide. The meeting, which was supposed to be an excuse to justify layoffs and cuts, became the stage where Clara showed them who she truly was. Each slide she presented, each document she revealed, raised a wall between lies and truth. Her co-workers stayed silent, some in disbelief, others in awe. What seemed an act of rebellion soon became a demonstration of wisdom, experience, and the power that comes from deep knowledge, even when overlooked. Clara, who had been ignored and underestimated, now held in her hands the key that could save the company from imminent disaster. A key that only someone with her years in the company could have. The tension in the air was palpable, but it wasn't Rodrigo who broke the silence. It was Clara who, with a steady, alert gaze, challenged them to rethink their prejudices. Age is not a limitation. It's history, experience, the kind that sometimes goes unseen but supports everything. I'm not here to ask for a second chance, but to show that what looks like an ending can actually be the start of a new story. And with those words, she left a question hanging in the air. Were they ready to value what they already had, before looking for something they might never find? That meeting ended with an impact no one expected. Clara didn't just prove her relevance, she also exposed an uncomfortable truth for everyone. The corporate world isn't always prepared to recognize the real value of experience, nor to admit the blindness caused by haste. But that afternoon, Clara taught them that there are secrets only revealed with time, patience, and a bit of courage. Because sometimes, to change everything, all it takes is not giving up. And her story was just beginning to unfold. Many questions remain unanswered. What will happen to the company? How will Rodrigo react? And above all, what path will Clara choose after proving that her greatest strength was exactly what no one wished to value? But one thing is clear, that 60-year-old woman who seemed invisible had just shone with a light no one could put out. Can you imagine what other secrets she keeps? Clara's story is a powerful reminder and an invitation to look beyond appearances. Because you never know when someone is about to change everything. When Marta opened the boardroom door that morning, she immediately noticed that something was wrong. The air was tense, far too tense for a typical Monday. Her colleagues shifted uncomfortably. Unintelligible whispers floated around the room, and at the table, the manager, Carlos, was already waiting with a stiff expression that chilled her to the bone. Marta was barely 60 years old, but in those moments, she felt more than ever like the target of an invisible attack, an attack that had been brewing for several weeks. She knew her age was the problem, even though no one said it out loud. "You're too old for this pace," they had repeated to her again and again in the corridors. Today, however, the time had come to name that poisonous tongue. "We need to talk about your situation in the company, Marta," Carlos began bluntly. The office fell silent, each word weighing like a slab of stone. "Your performance has declined. And honestly, we believe you're not in tune with the new market dynamics. I think the best thing is for us to seek new opportunities for you outside the company." Marta felt her world crumble in seconds, and inside her, a mixture of anger, sadness, and bewilderment began to burn like a silent fire. Why did her experience, loyalty, and all her effort matter so little now? The farewell was a stab to the heart, but Marta was not willing to stay silent. That day, she gathered her things with her head held high, even though the pain tried to bend her. But as she walked down the hallway, a firm thought began to take shape. She had an ace up her sleeve, a secret that could change everything, something no one in that company knew. Yet during the years she had worked there, Marta had discovered details that escaped the notice of most people. Small irregularities, suspicious movements in the finances, questionable decisions from the management that, if brought to light, could topple the very structure of the company. She had in her possession documents, emails, proof that she had kept like treasure waiting for the right moment, the moment that seemed to have arrived sooner than she imagined. A few days after being dismissed, an unexpected invitation arrived, an extraordinary meeting called by Carlos himself with the entire executive team. Marta was not on the list, obviously, but she decided to attend anyway. No one could have imagined that the woman they had just fired was about to turn the tables in less than an hour. When she entered the room, everyone looked at her with surprise and a bit of disdain. The word old resonated silently in the air. But Marta showed a calm and confidence that disarmed everyone. "I want you to hear this," she began, and then she spread out on the table a dossier full of evidence, documents revealing the dealings that had been hidden behind the veil of normality. "Before you judge me just for my age, you need to see this." Little by little, she wove each piece of data together with surgical precision. Every figure, every email, every strange movement that she had silently documented for years. Paolo, the head of finance, turned pale. Una, the human resources director, didn't know where to look. The room became an invisible battlefield, but now Marta had the upper hand. She wasn't an old and obsolete woman. She was the guardian of the truth. All the questions about her supposed inability to adapt vanished into thin air. Now the doubt was another. How could they have let all this happen? Their faces shifted expression, from contemptuous superiority to worry, then to fear. Marta knew that her strength didn't come from her youth, but from her wisdom and patience. In that moment, the woman who had been sidelined regained her power. It was then that, with a precise movement, she sent a copy of all the documentation to the board of directors and to an independent outside specialist. Without further explanation, she bid farewell with a serene smile. The meeting ended in chaos and unanswered questions, but no one would forget that session. The woman they had wanted to cast aside for being old had shown them who she really was, the last line of defense before a possible collapse. And as she walked down the hallway for the last time, Marta couldn't help but think of the irony. Those who had humiliated and fired her had underestimated something fundamental. Time had not only passed over her, it had also left her with knowledge that no figure in a spreadsheet could ever match. Now the company faced a storm it had been nurturing unknowingly, and she, at 60 years old, was ready to be the voice they could not silence. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The meeting room door closed with a sharp bang, leaving behind a silence heavy with expectation and sidelong glances. No one knew what would happen now, not even Marta. The 60-year-old woman who just hours earlier had heard the most painful words she could imagine. Your time here is over. She had been fired by her own boss, a much younger man, with a cold smile and not a hint of mercy. The official excuse was that old, unjust lie, too old to adapt to the new times. But Marta held something that could change everything, something no one expected, and that was now about to come to light, right in this meeting that had gathered them all. From the outside, Marta seemed like an ordinary woman. Grey hair tied in a bun, steady hands, a serene but deep gaze. But inside her, the storm that always boils within those who have been unfairly humiliated was raging. For years, she had been the backbone of that company, the one who knew its darkest corners, its best-kept secrets, and its fragile foundations hidden behind the shine of numbers and flawless presentations. No one else, or so she believed, had access to the information stored in her memory and in a secret digital file that only she knew how to open. The tension rose with every glance that swept across the room. The young employees exchanged nervous whispers, and the bosses avoided meeting Marta's eyes. They had forced her to sit in the corner, last on the list, like an uncomfortable memory from the past. But that day would be different. Marta did not come to beg for mercy. She came to reveal the truth. When the projector light came on, she gave a small sigh, took a breath, and unfolded a folder with documents that seemed insignificant, but which contained the keys to the looming disaster for the company. "Before I leave," she began, her voice firm but measured, "there's something you all should know." The room fell into absolute silence. Everyone held their breath. What could a woman who had just been fired have to say that they didn't already know? The first slide showed numbers, patterns, and dates. At first, no one understood. But Marta broke down the information with the patience of an old-school teacher. Analysis after analysis, she demonstrated that behind the facade of success, there were financial maneuvers that threatened to sink the company within weeks. Something only someone with her years and experience could detect, and that the young executives had ignored, or worse, tried to cover up. The murmurs grew. Why had no one seen this? Why hadn't something been done earlier? An executive got up upset, asking if this was some kind of revenge for being fired. Marta shook her head and delivered a phrase that made the room freeze. "This is not personal. It's professional. And it's the truth. You chose youth over experience, but now youth is lost in the darkness of its own ignorance." A turning point. The meeting had shifted from being a funeral for Marta to a trial for her bosses. With every fact she shared, with every piece of evidence presented, Marta stood taller, invincible. Her eyes shone with a fire few had ever seen. Those who had mocked her in the past could no longer hide their worry. They had underestimated the woman who, years ago, had saved the company from a similar crisis with her same instinct. But what no one expected was the final ace up Marta's sleeve. An encrypted file, a recording that proved that the invisible hands behind those fraudulent maneuvers were none other than her own boss, the same one who had humiliated and dismissed her minutes before with contempt, a betrayal disguised as modernization and generational change. When Marta played the file, the director's face turned pale, the room went silent, and the tension transformed into a ticking clock counting down to the explosion. Marta needed no trophy or recognition. Her only mission now was to save what she loved, even if she had to face the harshest ghost, the contempt for her age and the injustice of a world that too often forgets the value of time and experience. And so, just when all seemed lost, Marta proved that true strength lies not in youth, but in the wisdom that only time can give. The question left hanging in the room was clear. Who is really old, and who is too young to understand the legacy in their hands? The answer, as we knew, was in the eyes of everyone present. Because age is just a number. What matters is what we hold within us, and what we are willing to show when no one else believes in us. As soon as she crossed the office door, Marta felt all eyes on her, piercing her as if she were an intruder. She was 60 years old and had been working at the company for 2 decades. But that day, her boss, Mr. Ramirez, didn't have a single kind word for her. "Marta, sit down," he ordered in a cold, sharp tone. "We need to talk." She obeyed, not even knowing what to expect, and saw his face harden with every passing second. She took a deep breath and gathered her courage, but then, without preamble, she heard the sentence she had feared the most. "I'm sorry, but you no longer fit in. We're downsizing and need younger people with more energy for this pace. At your age, it's better for you to look for new horizons." A blow, the word older echoed in her mind like a sentence. Marta said nothing. She stood up, gathered her things, and left without looking back. But what her boss didn't know, what nobody in that room understood, was that Marta kept a powerful secret, a secret that could change the game for everyone. As she walked down the hallway toward the exit, she thought of the unexpected meeting she had overheard by chance days before in the next room. They were talking about a plan to change the entire structure of the company, and, even more surprising, they mentioned names and figures that only someone with years inside could know. Marta had access to data that no one else remembered. What if she was the key to unraveling that mystery? When she got home, she didn't want to get frustrated or feel sorry for herself. She turned on her old computer and began to go through archived files that no one else seemed to have touched in years. There they were, records, documents that proved irregularities, and maybe the opportunity to set things right. But she knew that to change her fate, she would have to meet again with her bosses, and not as a victim. She was going to need courage and strategy, and above all, the right moment to reveal what she knew. Could a 60-year-old woman considered obsolete bring down an entire management team? That question kept her awake. The day came sooner than she expected. The company called an urgent meeting, and everyone thought it would be about routine decisions. Marta knew her moment had arrived. She entered the room with steady steps, and her former colleagues' eyes widened when they saw her there. "Why did you insist on coming?" Ramirez asked her contemptuously. She smiled calmly and repeated a phrase that would echo in that room forever. "Because I have something to say, and no one else can do it." What came next changed the course of events in a way no one expected. Marta was not just an older worker. She was the keeper of the truth, and her revelation shook the very foundations of the company. Do you want to know what she said? What buried secrets was this unjustly dismissed woman protecting? What seemed to be a definitive farewell became the beginning of a battle no one saw coming. That is Marta's story, and believe me, we're only scratching the surface.